The ceiling fans churned the late summer air, but they couldn't cool the fever running through the South Dallas auditorium. Every seat was filled, shoulders pressed tight, knees grazing the backs of folding chairs. From the rafters, the heat hung heavy, laced with anticipation and the faint tongue of sweat. Reporters lined the back wall, their camera lenses glinting like watchful eyes. Already hungry for the headline dot, at the center of it all stood Jasmine Crockett, bathed in the hot glare of stage lights. Her palms rested lightly on the podium, but her posture told another story, shoulders squared, chin lifted, every muscle ready to meet the moment. The crowd's roar swelled and ebbed like a tide, pockets of applause punctuated by shouts of agreement. They had come for answers, for fire, for someone who would not shrink from a fight. The first insult cut through the noise like a whip crack. "You're a disgrace." A voice bellowed from the far aisle. The man stood tall, draped in a flag like a cape, his ball cap embroidered with bold white letters. The words he spat next were uglier, raw with contempt slurs hurled like stones. Booing erupted. People rose from their seats, some pointing toward the interrupter, others yelling back. The sound ricocheted off the walls, a chaotic swell threatening to drown everything. Jasmine didn't flinch. She turned her gaze toward him, her eyes sharpening into a flint-edged calm. "Injustice," she began, her voice steady, "isn't polite." The room stilled, not silent, but listening, leaning into the weight of her tone. The man tried to shout again, but his words faltered, smothered by the crowd's growing murmur of support. Jasmine stepped away from the podium, closing the physical gap between her and the disruption without breaking stride. "You can call me every name in your arsenal," she said, her voice carrying easily without the microphone now. "But understand, this truth doesn't bend because you're louder. Justice doesn't hide because you're angry." Gasps and low applause rippled through the front rows. She let the silence breathe for a beat, then pivoted back toward the audience, reclaiming the moment entirely. "This is Texas," she continued, sweeping her hand to encompass them all. "A land built on grit, on voices that refuse to be silenced. And tonight, in this room, we are not here to be polite. We are here to be heard." Somewhere in the back, a young woman stood and raised her fist. The crowd erupted, the energy shifting from tension to unity, as if the words had struck flint to stone. Jasmine's eyes glimmered not with triumph, but with the quiet recognition that battles like this were won in inches, not miles. Overhead, the stage lights caught the edges of her hair and cast her in a haloed glow. From the press table, a photographer framed the shot, a lone figure against the fractured backdrop of red and blue Texas, holding her ground in the crossfire of words. And as the chants began to build low at first, then swelling into a tidal force, Jasmine stood rooted. A reminder that courage often starts in the moment someone refuses to step back. The echoes of chanting still hummed in the air long after the provocateur was escorted out. Jasmine returned to the podium with a measured stride, each step carrying the weight of someone who had been here before, facing fire and refusing to turn away. Her fingers brushed the edge of her notes, but didn't open them. She didn't need paper for what was coming next. "This moment," she began, letting her voice settle deep into the room, "isn't about me. It's about truth." The crowd leaned in. Some crossed their arms. Others clasped hands in their laps, but every pair of eyes locked on her. Behind them, banners hung against the brick walls, messages of unity, of progress, but also reminders of the fractures she was here to confront. It had been only weeks since her words, "Governor Hot Wheels," had detonated across the Texas political landscape. She could still remember the first headline, the wave of angry calls to her office, the pointed op-eds framing her as cruel. What none of them wanted to hear, she thought bitterly, was the context, that her remark wasn't a jab at disability, was a condemnation of policies she saw as merciless. Policies that bust migrants into vulnerable communities without resources or preparation. Policies that treated human lives like pawns. Her jaw tightened as she recalled the footage of buses pulling into small towns at midnight, families stepping off into the cold, clutching children in their arms. That was the image in her mind when the words had slipped out. "They want you to believe," she said, pacing slowly along the edge of the stage, "that passion for justice is the same as hatred for a person. That if you call out cruelty, you are attacking the man, not the deed. They twist the truth until you question what you saw with your own eyes." She paused, scanning the front row where an older black woman nodded solemnly. In the third row, a Latino man clutched his daughter's hand. This was why she came back to rooms like this, not for the cameras, but for the faces that bore the weight of policy. "They think we'll be scared into silence," Jasmine continued, her voice tightening, "but silence is their greatest weapon, and I will not hand it to them." Applause burst, quick and sharp. She let it fade before leaning in toward the microphone. "Every insult, every misrepresentation of my words is just another attempt to keep you from seeing the truth. But I've been in enough courtrooms to know truth always has witnesses." The crowd erupted again, this time rising to their feet. Jasmine took in the sight hundreds standing shoulder to shoulder, voices louder than the lies she had spent the past month fighting. Somewhere in the press pool, a reporter scribbled a note. He'd just decided the headline for tomorrow. By the time the applause faded, Jasmine had already shifted her stance, bracing for the next blow in a fight that had been brewing for months. Redistricting. The very word seemed to hang in the air, like a loaded weapon. Everyone in the room knew what it meant, not in the abstract, but in their own lived reality. Lines on a map, drawn in far-off offices, could determine whose voices mattered and whose were erased. She gripped the sides of the podium. "Let me put it plain," she began, her voice threading steel with sorrow. "Black Texans? You've been deprived of 4/5 of your rightful representation. Latino Texans? 1/3. Asian Texans? Nearly invisible." Her words landed with the weight of a gavel strike. No charts, no legal jargon, just blunt truth. Somewhere in the back, a man in a crisp suit shifted uncomfortably. Jasmine saw him. She saw all of them, the silent observers sent to take notes for their bosses, the ones who'd later report, "She's dangerous because she makes people feel." "This isn't about politics," she pressed on. "It's about power, about who gets to decide what your neighborhood looks like, who funds your schools, whether your roads are fixed, and right now, those decisions are being stolen from you." She took a slow breath, scanning the crowd. In the front row, a young activist scribbled feverishly into a battered notebook. Near the aisle, an older man's jaw clenched as if holding back decades of frustration. "They tell you it's just numbers on a page," Jasmine said, stepping away from the podium again. "But those numbers decide which hospitals stay open, which communities get clean water, which of your children have the chance to dream bigger than their zip code." A murmur swept through the room, not dissent, but the low rumble of people recognizing themselves in her words. She let it grow, feeding the momentum. "I have read their maps," she continued, her voice rising, "and I have seen the truth in them. The truth is that they are building a Texas where some voices matter more than others, and they expect you to accept it as the natural order of things." She stopped mid-stage, letting the silence bite. "Don't accept it," she said finally, almost a whisper, but one that cut through the auditorium like glass. The applause this time wasn't polite. It was raw, urgent, the kind that rose from the pit of the stomach. People were no longer just spectators, they were witnesses, and in that room, they had become a jury. Somewhere deep inside, Jasmine knew this fight would not be won tonight. But the spark was here, and she could already feel it catching. Tomorrow, the opposition's talking points would flood the airwaves. But tonight, Tonight, the truth had the microphone. The applause still echoed in the rafters when the memory came. Creeping back grainy video, clipped sentences, the moment her Hot Wheels remark became political dynamite. Jasmine had replayed it more times than she cared to admit, not because she doubted her intent, but because she knew how easily intent was drowned by interpretation. The footage was everywhere on local news loops, on national talk shows, sliced into bite-sized outrage for social media. Over and over, pundits stripped away the context, leaving only the sting. A personal attack, they called it. Cruel, disrespectful to the disabled community. In her office late one night, Jasmine had sat alone in the glow of her laptop, watching the clip once more. The words came back exactly as she'd said them, her tone sharp with anger at Governor Abbott's decision to ship busloads of migrants to cities without warning. She remembered the Stories families stepping off at midnight with nothing but plastic grocery bags, mothers clutching infants against the cold. That was the image in her head, not the man's wheelchair. But the nuance had been buried. They'll never give you the benefit of the doubt, her communications director had warned. Once they smell blood, they don't stop. Now, standing before the crowd in South Dallas, Jasmine let that truth harden her resolve. Some people, she said slowly, want you to believe that calling out cruelty is the same as mocking the person who commits it. That's not what happened. I don't attack people for who they are. I hold them accountable for what they do. A murmur rippled across the audience agreement, mixed with indignation on her behalf. They want you to think words like mine are reckless, she continued, pacing deliberately. But I've seen far more reckless things in policy than in speech. You want to talk about recklessness? It's busing families across state lines without food, shelter, or care. It's playing political games with human lives. She locked eyes with a young mother near the aisle, a toddler on her lap. If speaking the truth in plain language makes them uncomfortable, she said, her voice tightening, then maybe they should look at why the truth burns. Applause surged, washing over her like a wave. The tension that had coiled in her chest since that first headline loosened, just slightly. But she knew this wasn't absolution. It was only a reminder that some people still saw through the noise dot in the third row. A local journalist scribbled in his notebook. He wasn't smiling, but he didn't look convinced by the old narrative. Either. That was a start. Somewhere outside, the humid Texas night pressed against the glass, heavy and unyielding. Inside, Jasmine's voice cut through it like a blade. This battle wasn't just over maps or migrants. It was about who got to define the truth. And she had no intention of letting her opponents write that definition alone, not the tension in the O. Studio had reached a boiling point, but now almost imperceptibly it began to shift. It wasn't Joy Behar speaking that caught people's attention, but the subtle change in the audience's demeanor. A moment ago, laughter and scattered. Applause followed her every jab. Now, there was hesitation. Uncertainty. Harrison Ford sat back in his chair, his jaw set, eyes unflinching. He didn't speak immediately. He let the silence do its work. In that pause, the air felt charged, like static before a storm. The audience's clapping died mid-beat, leaving only the hum of the cameras and the creak of stage lights overhead. Joy's smile faltered. "What? Cat got your tongue, Harrison?" she said, her tone light but brittle around the edges. He leaned forward slowly, resting his forearms on the table. "You know, Joy, I've been in this industry long enough to recognize when someone's not having a conversation, but an ambush." A ripple went through the crowd. Some gasped, others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The director in the control room barked into his headset. Camera 3, stay tight on Joy's reaction. Joy laughed, but it was too sharp to be casual. "An ambush? Please. This is called having a discussion." Ford tilted his head slightly, his voice quiet but cutting. Discussions don't usually involve twisting someone's words before they finish a sentence. From the third row, a woman muttered something to her neighbor, loud enough for others to hear. "He's right." Another person nodded in agreement. The murmur spread, a small wave of dissent among what had been a united front. Joy noticed it too. She tried to regain control. "Harrison, you came here to promote your movie. If you can't handle a little pushback, maybe you're in the wrong chair." Ford's eyes narrowed. Pushback is fine. Misrepresentation is not. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The audience collectively leaned forward. "You want to talk about facts? Let's talk about what you said last week on this very show." The paper shook slightly as he unfolded it, not from nerves, but from the force of restraint. He read her exact words, and as he did, the footage played on the giant screen behind them. The audience could hear Joy's voice from the clip, crisp, an undeniable dot. By the time he finished, the murmurs had grown into audible commentary. Some clapped. Others shook their heads. Joy looked toward the producers for support, but even they seemed momentarily frozen, unsure of how to spin the moment. Ford leaned back, his point made without theatrics, his expression unchanging. "That's not pushback. That's distortion. And I think the people here deserve to see the difference." The applause this time was louder, and it wasn't for Joy. The set of "The View" felt different that morning, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Harrison Ford sat rigidly in his chair, his jaw tight, eyes fixed not on Joy Behar, but somewhere far beyond her. The other hosts exchanged glances, aware that the last segment had already pushed them to the edge of disaster. Joy, however, was not one to retreat. She leaned forward, a smirk playing on her lips. "So, Harrison," she said, drawing out the syllables as if savoring the tension, "I have to ask, do you always get this defensive when someone questions your memory?" The studio went still. Even the camera operators froze for half. A beat before remembering to keep the lens trained on the actor's face. Harrison's voice came low, deliberate. "No, Joy," he said, "but I do get defensive when someone confuses an honest disagreement with a character flaw." A murmur rippled through the audience, soft gasps, the shuffle of someone leaning forward in their seat. Joy tilted her head, pretending to feign innocence. "I'm just asking questions," she replied, her tone laced with challenge. From the control room, the producer's voice crackled over the crew's headsets. "Don't cut. Let this play out." Harrison finally turned his gaze on her, sharp and unwavering. "Questions are fine," he said, "but framing them like accusations? That's something else." For a moment, the air between them felt electric, almost combustible. The audience didn't clap, didn't cheer. They simply stared, hooked on every syllable. Joy shifted in her seat, but instead of backing down, she doubled down. "If you're so sure about your version of events," she said, "maybe you'd like to tell everyone what really happened during that infamous backstage moment." The crowd let out a collective "oh," sensing she had just thrown gasoline on the fire. Harrison exhaled slowly, the faintest smile curling at the edges of his lips, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind that said he was done playing. By her rules. "You want to talk about backstage moments?" he said, his voice calm but cutting. "Fine. Let's talk about the one where you told me off camera that stirring up drama is the only way to stay relevant." The room erupted. The audience gasped so loudly it nearly drowned out Joy's immediate protest. "That's not—" she began, but her voice faltered as she realized every eye in the room was on her dot. The co-hosts sat frozen, their expressions a mix of shock and fascination. Harrison didn't press further. He didn't need to. The truth, or at least his truth, was now out in the open, and it was Joy who had to sit with it. For the first time in the entire exchange, She seemed momentarily speechless. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the faint hum of the stage lights overhead. Somewhere in the back, the floor manager mouthed 2 words to a camera operator. We got it. The air in the studio was now thick enough to cut with a knife. Every camera was trained on the table where Harrison Ford and Joy Behar sat, their earlier polite exchanges now replaced with a tense silence that hummed beneath the studio lights. The audience, sensing the change, leaned forward in their seats. Even the production crew exchanged nervous glances, waiting to see which way this would tip. Joy Behar adjusted her glasses and leaned toward Harrison, her voice deceptively calm but tinged with accusation. Harrison, you keep talking about accountability, but where was yours when your last film faced backlash for its depiction of women? The question hit like a bullet, fast and deliberate. Harrison didn't flinch. His eyes locked on hers with the quiet intensity of a man who'd been in this position before, cornered, questioned, but never beaten. Joy, he said, voice steady, I don't take criticism lightly. But I also don't take being misrepresented lightly either. That film told a story set in a time when things were different. It wasn't an endorsement. It was a reflection of history. Joy smirked. That's convenient. And I suppose you think the audience just can't separate art from reality? The tension was palpable. A few members of the audience gasped. The co-hosts shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsure whether to intervene or let this verbal sparring continue. Harrison leaned forward now, his tone sharpening. No, I think the audience is smarter than some in the media give them credit for. People can understand nuance. What they can't stand, he paused deliberately, scanning the crowd, is being lectured by people who've decided for them what's acceptable to watch, read, or think. A murmur rippled through the studio. Joy's smile faltered just slightly, and it was enough for viewers to sense a shift in power. For the first time, the control of the conversation was slipping from Joy's grasp. She straightened in her chair and tried to regain footing. So, you're saying the media should just let things slide? No accountability? No pushback? Harrison shook his head. No, but there's a difference between asking questions and making accusations. Between discussing ideas and shaming people into silence. The audience broke into applause, the sound swelling and echoing through the set. Even some of Joy's usual supporters clapped, caught up in the energy of the moment. The camera cut to the producers in the control room, who exchanged frantic whispers. This was not in the script, but it was undeniable television gold. Joy, sensing that the audience was slipping away, tried to retake the ground. Well, Harrison, if you're that confident in your audience's intelligence, I suppose you won't mind a little more tough questioning. Harrison gave a small, almost amused smile. Ask away, Joy. Just be ready for honest answers. The crowd roared again. Something had shifted. Harrison wasn't just defending himself anymore. He was winning the room. And Joy knew it. The air inside the hearing room was different now. Not the tense anticipation of earlier, but the charged electricity of a storm about to break. Cameras zoomed in, lenses hungry for the moment, and every viewer at home could sense it. Jasmine Crockett had something. Mr. Ford, she said, her voice a low hum of control. You've spoken in broad strokes about your disagreements with Ms. Behar, but what you've conveniently left out is this. From the folder on her desk, she drew out a single sheet of paper, thick, official, its letterhead unmistakable. The audience shifted in their seats. Joy Behar's eyes narrowed into a thin line. Harrison Ford, for the first time, that morning, leaned forward. This, Jasmine continued, holding it up so the cameras could catch every word, is a transcript from an off-air conversation, verified by multiple witnesses, and time-stamped just 2 days before this interview was scheduled. Gasps rippled across the gallery. Jasmine set the paper down, reading, If Ford wants to sit here and promote his movie, fine, Ms. Behr allegedly said, but I won't go easy on someone who thinks he can outwit me on live television. Joy straightened her back. That's not... But Jasmine's raised hand cut her off, sharp as a gavel strike. There's more. This transcript also includes statements that were edited out of the final broadcast. Comments that changed the entire context of your so-called heated debate. The murmurs grew louder now, a sea of whispers swelling in the room. A court officer called for order, but the drama was already too loud to contain. Harrison glanced. Between them, jaw set. And what exactly are you implying, Congresswoman? That this wasn't an organic clash, Jasmine said, her voice steady, unwavering. This was a setup, a manufactured confrontation designed for ratings, with you, Mr. Ford, as the unwitting pawn. The words landed heavy. Even through the bright studio lights, one could see the color drain slightly from Ford's face. Joy's hands clasped, together tightly, a subtle tell of someone fighting to maintain composure. Jasmine slid the transcript toward him. Read it, if you'd like, or you can tell the truth right now. For a beat, no one spoke. Even the clicking of photographers' cameras had stilled. It was as if the entire world leaned in, waiting for his choice. Finally, Ford looked down at the paper, scanning it line by line. When he reached the bottom, his lips pressed into a thin line. He looked up, meeting Jasmine's gaze, and for the briefest moment, something passed between them. Understanding? Regret? It was hard to. Tell Dot he pushed the paper back toward her. That's not the whole story, he said quietly, but it's closer than you think. The crowd reacted instantly, a chorus of gasps and murmurs. And Jasmine, sensing she had cracked the armor, leaned forward just slightly, ready for the next blow. The storm had truly begun. The View's studio, normally buzzing with applause and light-hearted chatter, now felt like a powder keg. The tension from Harrison Ford's earlier remarks still hung in the air like a storm cloud. Cameras captured every flicker of expression. Joy, Behr's jaw tight, her eyes narrowing as she shifted in her seat. Harrison, sitting opposite her, wasn't slouched in casual comfort anymore. He was forward, elbows on the table, voice low, but unwavering. You wanted honesty, he said, not looking away. So here it is. The audience, sensing something historic, had gone from polite viewers to active participants. Gasps punctuated the air as Harrison laid out his points, weaving them through the context of his career, his values, and his unwillingness to let Hollywood's curated narratives control the truth. Joy tried to regain her footing. You can't just come on national television, and why not? Harrison cut in. The interruption wasn't loud, but it was sharp. The sound of it seemed to ripple through the studio. People are tired of conversations where nothing real gets said. You bring me here for a conversation. You're going to get one. The audience erupted not with the usual applause, but with a scattered mix of cheers, murmurs, and incredulous laughter. Some were clearly on his side. Others leaned forward, waiting for Joy to hit back. The producers, frantically gesturing from the sidelines, tried to signal Joy to move the segment along. But she ignored them, unwilling to let Harrison dictate the pace. You're an actor, Joy said finally, her voice sharpening. You play pretend for a living. Maybe leave the real-world analysis to people who live in it every day. For a second, there was silence, just the hum of the studio lights. Harrison's brow furrowed, and he gave a small, humorless chuckle. I've been in more real situations than you think. And unlike most people talking about this stuff, I don't have to say what's popular to keep my job. The crowd exploded, some cheering wildly, others booing in defense of Joy. The noise was so loud that Whoopi Goldberg, seated further down the table, raised her hands in mock surrender. Okay, we're going to need seatbelts for this one, she said, but her eyes darted nervously toward the producer's dot in the control room. A producer muttered under his breath, "This is either the best segment of the year or a PR disaster." Joy leaned in, her smile gone. "So you think you're untouchable?" Harrison didn't blink. "No, I just don't think fear should be running the conversation." The words hit hard, too hard to ignore. The audience's divided reaction solidified into two camps, those standing in roaring approval and those shaking their heads, visibly uncomfortable dot by the time the segment cut to commercial. The atmosphere in the studio had shifted entirely. Harrison Ford hadn't just answered Joy's questions, he'd taken control of the show. And the crowd, for better or worse, was fully awake. The gallery was silent, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Every eye in the room darted between Harrison Ford and Joy Behar. What had started as a spirited debate had now evolved into something raw, something personal. Harrison sat with his elbows on the desk, his hands clasped tightly, eyes fixed on Joy. There was no smirk, no teasing glint in his gaze, only the steady burn of conviction. Joy, on the other hand, leaned forward in her chair, papers forgotten. Her voice carried that sharp, cutting tone honed from decades of live TV, but beneath it, there was a flicker of something else. Perhaps frustration, perhaps the awareness that she was standing on a stage where the audience wasn't entirely hers. "You talk about accountability, Harrison," she said, her voice tight. "But you've spent decades in an industry built on keeping secrets. Don't lecture me on truth." It was the first real blow, and the crowd felt it. A murmur ran through the audience like the ripple of wind through dry grass. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every twitch of expression. Harrison didn't flinch. He took a breath, slow, deliberate. "You think I'm here to protect Hollywood?" His tone was low, each word landing like the steady beat of a war drum. "No, I'm here because I've watched good people lose everything while the powerful rewrite the story to suit themselves." "You think that's just Hollywood?" "It's everywhere, Joy." There it was, the pivot. He wasn't playing her game anymore. He was reframing the conversation entirely. Joy's jaw tightened. She could feel control slipping. Her co-hosts, who had been trying to stay neutral, exchanged quick glances, uncertain whether to step in or let this unfold. The studio lights seemed hotter now, the space smaller. The air between them felt thick. "You know what happens when people don't speak up?" Harrison continued, his voice rising just enough to fill the room. "The wrong version of the truth becomes permanent. And that's what you've been doing here for years." A sharp gasp came from somewhere in the audience. The tension was so taut, it was almost audible. Joy's fingers curled around the edge of her desk. She wanted to fire back, but for the first time that morning, her words stalled. It was only a half-second pause, but in live television, half a second is an eternity. Harrison noticed. The audience noticed Dot, and then, breaking the silence, he leaned forward and delivered the line that would loop endlessly on social media for days. "Joy, you don't fear the truth because it's inconvenient. You fear it because it's undeniable." The room erupted. Applause, murmurs, and a few stunned faces. The director in the control booth signaled for a commercial, but it was too late. The moment was sealed. Joy's smile returned, but it was thin, forced, the kind worn by someone who knows the fight isn't over, only postponed. The break between segments was supposed to cool tempers, but the opposite happened. In the shadows behind the cameras, Harrison Ford stood apart from the producers, arms crossed, watching Joy Behar speak in hushed tones with the show's executive producer. Her sharp gestures and narrowed eyes left no doubt she was strategizing. Her next strike. Harrison didn't care much for TV drama, but he hated dishonesty, and Joy's last remark had crossed a line. It wasn't just about him. It was about twisting the truth for entertainment. That, in his mind, was poison. A stagehand whispered, "We're back in 30 seconds," and the crew scrambled into position. Harrison took his seat, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. His jaw was set, eyes hard. He wasn't here to promote a film anymore. This was something else, a reckoning. The theme music played, lights came up, and Joy launched straight in. "So, Harrison," she said, voice coated in mock curiosity. During the break, our viewers online sent in comments. Some are wondering if maybe you've lost touch with the times. Maybe your way of seeing the world is just outdated. The audience gave a mixture of gasps and laughs, sensing the bait. Harrison's response was slow, deliberate. "You. No, Joy. When you've lived long enough, you realize some things don't expire. Truth doesn't expire. Integrity doesn't expire. And decency sure as hell doesn't expire. What does expire?" He pointed briefly toward the crowd. "Is the patience of people watching media personalities twist the world into something it's not, just for a little applause." The room shifted. A few claps broke out in the audience, quickly swelling into cheers. Joy's smile faltered. She fired back. "So, you're saying you know better than everyone else? That your way is the only right way?" "No," Harrison said firmly, his voice cutting through the noise. "I'm saying I know what's real. And what's real is not decided by Twitter, trends, or network ratings." The camera operator instinctively zoomed in on his face, capturing the steel in his eyes. This was no longer actor versus host. This was a clash of principles, raw and unscripted. Joy leaned back, folding her arms. "Interesting. And what do you think the real world is, Harrison?" He leaned in, voice low, but every word carrying. "The real world is what happens when the lights go off, when no one's watching. When your words actually affect people's lives. And the real world doesn't care how good you look saying them." For a moment, silence ruled the studio. Even the crew froze. Then the audience erupted not with polite applause, but with a thunderous roar of approval. People were standing, cheering, whistling. Joy glanced at the producer off camera, clearly rattled. She had wanted a spectacle. Now, she had one only. She wasn't the one winning it. And Harrison Ford? He just sat back, letting the noise roll over him, knowing he'd said exactly what needed to be said.